All right. So we're going to talk today about the ones. And type 1. He calls, Thompson in the book Parable and the Enneagrams, calls type 1 virtue as its own reward. Okay? And what we want, all of us want something deeply in our deepest inner self. And for the ones, it's serenity. It's peace. You know, it's that the world is a good place. It's the idea of the Hebrew word shalom, of wholeness, of a completeness that is there. And how do we experience a peace that passes understanding? It's hard. And when we don't experience it, a lot of times we may try. And we try harder and harder. And as we settle into it, we settle into thinking that it's our responsibility to make that peace happen. To get that going. To bring that peace to pass. So we work hard and we settle, instead of allowing the peace to come of its own accord, of working and keeping order and making things fit so that all of it, so that the peace can happen. Now listen to this story, which is a constant fight for the one. On a certain Sabbath, Jesus was walking through a field of ripe grain. His disciples were pulling off heads of grain, rubbing it in their hands to get rid of the chaff, and eating them. Well, some Pharisees said, "Why are you doing that? Breaking a Sabbath rule." But Jesus stood up for them. "Have you never read what David and those with him did when they were hungry? How he entered the sanctuary and ate fresh bread off the altar? Bread that no one but priests were allowed to eat. He also handed it out to his companions." And then he said, and you can see him turning to the scribes and the Pharisees, the crowd, "The Son of Man is no slave to the Sabbath. He's in charge of the Sabbath." Ones, however, are morally correct. They are the Pharisees of the world. Always have been. In giving Pharisees a bad name, that is, anyways. They do what's right. But that's a terrible strategy for winning God's approval. It's the wrong strategy. Ones want the universe to recognize the effort that they're putting into the world. And that's a control that is a Pharisaic tradition that really gets shown up in the New Testament. It's the idea, you remember last week we did the parable inside the parable inside the parable. Well, there's this kernel of God's truth. And so one of the ways to protect that kernel of truth is to build a hedge around it. Build some laws around it so that I don't get close to breaking God's law. Well, the next person builds another hedge around it to be sure that I don't get that close, because if I got that close, I might get too close, so we build another hedge. And so we end up building up all these hedges, and by the time of Jesus, there were so many hedges. There were so many laws that you couldn't do that explained why you couldn't do this law and why you couldn't do that, that it was just impossible for anybody to keep all the laws. And everybody knew it was impossible. So, but all the time that you're building those hedges, you're getting further and further away from the essence of what is God's law. So the question comes, have you ever been close to a parable? Have you ever truly been close? Or are these hedges, these automatic preconceptions that you have? Do they keep you away from the essence of the parable? And for the 1, how do you please God? How do you get God's approval? How do you get the approval of the universe? How do you get the approval of your mom, your dad, your spouse, your boss? All of that becomes very, very important because you're working for that approval. Well, in Scripture, the first way was that people sacrificed to their gods. And God, in the Bible, stopped that with Isaac, where he said, no, don't sacrifice your son. Okay. And gave a different way of sacrificing. And then there was the law that was given. So if you want to get close to God, you want to get God's approval, then you obey the law. And so you begin to, do you know the law? Do you know what it means? Do you know how to do it? And no misstep. Okay? You cannot even be a little bit wrong. So ones become irritated when the law isn't obeyed. When people get away with it. Whatever it is. I mean, you just know when people get away with it. Ones just go, just kind of resentment. Absolutely. They want the deep desires for the world to be good. And to be good, it needs to be fair. It needs to be balanced. It needs to be responsible. That's what we have to participate in. So the story that I just told, your Lord of the Sabbath, is the human need more important than the ritual need, the ritual law. And yes, we all know it is, but it still grates on that one, that why can't I do both? Why can't I do both? The subtleness in the one, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath? Well, the Sabbath is God's day. God is good. So what you should be doing is what is good. Are you right in what is here, or you are right by the law, by the book? When you can't be right by the book, then you get kind of angry and frustrated, and you get punitive in punishing yourself and others, because it's like, who are you? It really begins to affect your self-esteem and what you think of yourself and what you think of others. Because nobody's measuring up to this standard that you have. Now, ones want peace. But remember, it's the peace of shalom, of wholeness. However, they try to achieve it by moral effort. There's this need to maintain a moral integrity of, I ought to, I should, I must. You know, all of, when you find yourself using those words, you need to raise a little red flag and see how much you're really investing in that. But instead of being able to work for the peace, they settle for making their world smaller so that they can contain it. Okay? You contract it. And all the types do this. We contract what we can't control or get our hands on. And so you constrict the world to make it orderly, not messy. And here is that obsession with the need to control. And remember the 8, 9, and 1 types. Power and control is just something that has to happen. So they become addicted to anger. They might call it frustration, but it really is anger. You're upset that it's not working the way it should work. Now, anger gets expressed through the comparing mind, where you find others and yourself wanting. But you find yourself wanting against some kind of standard that's created. So what is and what it should be. One's love an objective external standard. A lot of us do. But it's because you're not trusting the internal heart. You see, you're building a hedge around it because you don't trust the heart to be able to make the right decision. So they hold up a measurement that you can prove, okay, I can draw a line and you either meet it or you don't meet it. I can see that. Now, the need that we have to come to is to begin to relax that external measurement to allow the internal heart to emerge. Because the heart's there. It's there. Ones have tremendous heart, but they're hiding it up. They're protecting it with these hedges, with these rules. And so it makes them critical of themselves and others. So what can you do to knock a one off base? What can you do to help them to rethink how they're viewing the world? Well, that's what our parables help us do. To allow the heart to emerge without that standard measurement requirement. This is found in the parable of the lost sheep gone astray. And it's subtle. You know, that first little story I told you was really right, explicit, on the money, you know, it was what it was. This one's a little bit more subtle. So I'm going to tell you the story, okay? So if you would, listen with the ears of your heart. Well, this is a box, and we know that parables come in boxes because there's something really special inside them. And this one is gold, so it must be a very important parable. But the thing about it's not just a box, it's not just gold, it has a lid. And lids are meant to be opened. So if I open it, what am I going to find? All right. First of all, it's green. I wonder what it could be. It's getting bigger and bigger. It could be a big ball. It could be a bit of grass. Maybe there'll be some more that will tell us what it is. Here's something else. Now it's blue. It's kind of oval shaped. It's, could be the sky. Could be water. Now this, I can't see through these. They're dark. They're kind of big. I wonder what they would be. And then there are some strips. Here is this strip. And this could be the beginning. And this could be the end. But perhaps this is the beginning. And this is the end. But there are two of them. And maybe this is the way I would go, in between the two of them. But there's more. And if I put this like this, and then place this one here, it's like a box. There's the inside, and then there's the outside. I wonder, would you rather be in the inside, or would you rather be outside? Now there are more, and if I add more, it looks like it's getting a little bit stronger. It's getting taller. It would make it, if I was inside, I might not be able to get out. But if I wanted inside and I was outside, I might not be able to get in. Where would I want to be? I could change it so that I could make a way to come inside if I wanted to be in, and to go outside if I wanted to go out. I wonder what's in that place. Perhaps it might be a place where sheep could be, and they would be safe and sound while they were there. Once there was a good shepherd, and the good shepherd took care of his sheep. And he kept them safe at night, and during the daytime he might bring them out, and as he watched over them, he would let them eat the wonderful grass and play. But then after they played and ate, he might take them to clear, still waters and let them be able to safely drink from the water. And then he would take them to the green pastures and to all the different places. And even if they went through hard, dangerous places, he would be there. And he would make sure that they could come through safely. And he would bring them home safe at night to rest in the sheepfold, ready for another day. And if one was missing, he would go back and he would search and he would look until he had found the sheep. And when he found the sheep, he would bring it back and safely put it in with the rest of the sheep. I wonder if the shepherd knows the sheep's names. I wonder if he notices where they are all the time. I wonder if I was one of these sheep, would the shepherd come after me? Where are you in this parable?
Okay.
And then we would take all of these up and we would hold the parable in our heart and know that the Good Shepherd would always take care of us. And this parable is always there. And for the children, we put it on a shelf. And anytime they want to play with it, they can take it out. And they can tell the story the way they tell the story. Now, why is that an important parable for ones? Now, it's important for everyone, but why does that, what does that hit for the ones? And I said it's subtle.
I'd like to offer a suggestion, possibly.
Okay.
I hear you. I would suggest that for once they're not in charge, they're going to have to be dependent upon God or the shepherd
Okay.
instead of their own devices.
Okay, they have to be dependent on someone else.
Exactly.
Or they may have wandered away,
They may have wandered away.
but shepherd comes
The shepherd
because
comes.
they're important.
Because they're important. Oh my gosh. Even though they messed up, they're still important.
It's being found
Being found.
is to be secure.
Mm-hmm.
You know that you will be found.
Yeah.
It's unconditional love.
It's unconditional love. And ones put conditions on all sorts of things. And this just totally wipes that out. There's no condition for God's love. You can't earn it. There's nothing you could do that would make you good enough. There's nothing that you could do that would make you bad enough. The love of God is unconditional. Now, is that parable practical for everything? No, we don't want people to just go out and willy-nilly be bad people or all of this. But that's not the point of the parable. The point of the parable is to illustrate the real essence and power of God's love. And that's the power of transformation. It's not all the efforting, it's the power of that intensity of love.
For me, it has a meaning of never being alone.
Of never being alone.
This particular parable was very important in my life. I was delivering a baby.
Mhm.
You know how you have a focal point as you're bringing
Yes.
in. and this was my focal point. And so this parable is, with me all the time, just because of that, because it was an important time in my life.
Yeah.
And it would be so, I'd like to share that feeling of being comforted, never being alone, with my grandkids or with my siblings. But it's pretty intense if you've experienced that.
Yes.
To describe it is kind of tough.
Yeah, it is intense. And looking at the parables in this kind of way can bring that intensity.
In a beautiful way.
Yes. So anybody get the idea of the 23rd Psalm? The Lord is my shepherd, leads me beside still waters. It's
Well, and the type 5, it's important because part of the type 5 thing is being invisible
yes.
and almost not there.
Hmm.
And this means that somebody always sees me.
Yes.
I'm not ever invisible.
Yeah. That good shepherd sees even when you hide behind the doggone rocks and the bad terrain. Yeah. And can find you. Yeah. So the point of the parable is that God loves you. I mean, it's a very simple point. It really is. Does He love you more than the 99 missing? Well, that's kind of, He loves the 99 and keeps them safe, but the one that needs His help, that's who He's going to go to. And the 99 may fuss, where were you? But He's going to go looking, which even if you mess up, you see that God cares. Now, emotionally, ones don't particularly like this. They like the idea of a God of love. I mean, who doesn't, on the surface? But they become obsessed with the reason why you strayed or why you got away. Because they feel like you must have had some responsibility in all of that. Okay? It's interesting. The story is set with the beginning of the story is set saying that Jesus, as a response for Jesus eating with sinners and tax collectors. So the Pharisees are saying, why does He eat with sinners and tax collectors? Well, he's setting a bad example. And so Jesus tells these 3 parables in a row. They're listed in a row. And they are, the lost sheep is the first one, and it's the nature of sheep to wander, to get lost. You can't let sheep out there wild because they can't take care of themselves. They have to have somebody. The next one is the lost coin. The woman who is searching for, it's an inanimate object. Has no responsibility in any respect of what's going on. The lost son, or one of the favorite parables in all of the New Testament, the prodigal son, is the third story. And that person definitely messed up on his own. I mean, that's a clear, concise point where he messed up. And yet, the story is about God being the Father, the one who welcomes him back. And brings him back right where he was from before, into full family allegiance. So God offers love to people regardless. You don't have to keep score with God. God doesn't keep score. The law, in a way, we say the law creates sinners because it gives you this measurement. And if you don't meet up with it, then you don't obey, you're a sinner. Well, there's another way to say it, is the law also shows us where we don't make the grade. shows us how we keep falling. And that can be by individual acts of not making the grade, or it can be by this consistent outlook we have that makes us go in this one direction. Each type takes on a responsibility that is not theirs. For type 1, it's to keep the peace. It's an impossible job. Each type takes on this impossible job. So to keep the peace, you have to make peace exist. So you have to keep things just so. You contract. It's like working to keep order on a herd of cats. Okay, it's not in the nature of cats to be herded. It's not in the nature of sheep to keep from wandering. You have to keep an eye on them. Just close your eyes for a minute and imagine those cats and trying to keep them and trying to make them do what you want them to do. Oh, good Lord. You know, it's not possible. Instead, the way of God is to let it go. To let life flow instead of making life measure up to your standards that you've created. Let it be. You know, like that song. Just let it be. And it will irritate you, frustrate you, but you will be better for it, and so will the rest of the world. Our job is to actually let go of the responsibility that was never ours to begin with. It's in the nature of cats to not be herded. It's in the nature of sheep to wander. It's in the nature of humans not to be God. Can we recognize that the nature of life and what the nature of life is, and not make it conform to the construct of our making? Because that's what the type is trying to do. It's trying to say, this is the way to make it perfect, to make it right. Each type tries to play God in its own way. For the one, it is to control, to be the key to making the mechanism of the whole world work. A clue for ones is when you start thinking mechanically, when you find yourself comparing, measuring, you can bet you're going on automatic and settling for second best, for just keeping order, instead of allowing the peace to flow. Let your co-workers have a say. Let your families have a say in what's going on. Let the universe have a say in what happens in the world. In search of peace, ones discover the need to have order. And we do have to have order. But they want to control the chaos by looking at what's wrong and then what disturbs that order and peace and trying to fix it. Ones are little fix-it machines. Healthier ones have learned to live in the messiness of imperfection. You know, letting go of control. Ones, like everybody else, have this desire to be loved. Not too long ago, well, just last week, I went to the movie and saw LBJ with, I think, Woody Harrelson. And, oh my gosh, there was that one point where Lady Bird said, because people were asking for LBJ, what does he want? Because he was shooting out all these orders, blah, 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 blah. What does he want? And she looked at him and said, he wants to be loved. He wants to be loved.
That's what first ladies are for.
Absolutely, absolutely. And ones want to be loved by God, by the universe, by other people and by themselves. And they
You one?
Huh?
What do you think?
Oh, I have no idea if he was, but that certainly was a one statement. Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to put a type on a person, but you certainly can see elements of type on people. And we all have the types. So let's return to a key element for ones. Comparisons. Okay. So Jesus brings up a parable of comparisons so that ones could really understand this parable. Now remember, the good people want or desire to be loved by God. They want peace. They want to be close to God. And there's nothing wrong with that desire. But ones do so by being good enough to earn it. Okay? So this is the story Jesus tells. He told this next story to some who were complacently pleased with themselves over their moral performance and looked down their noses at the common people. Classic one. Okay, and this is in Luke 18, 9 through 14. 2 men went up to the temple to pray. One a Pharisee, the other a taxman. The Pharisee posed and prayed like this: "Oh God, I thank you that I am not like other people, robbers, crooks, adulterers, or heaven forbid, like this taxman. I fast twice a week, and I tithe on all my income." Meanwhile, the taxman slumped in the shadows, his face in his hands. Not daring to look up, he said, "God, have mercy on me. Forgive me, a sinner." And Jesus makes this comment. This taxman, just in case you didn't get the message, this taxman, not the other, went home made right with God. We use the word, the Greek used the words justified with God. Just as if I'd never messed up. So this taxman, not the other, went home made right with God. If you walk around with your nose in the air, you're going to end up flat on your face. But if you're content to simply be yourself, you will become more than yourself. Ones have a hard time of simply being themselves because they don't think they're good enough. They don't think they're good enough. So the comment then, the story that is immediately after this little story, is the story that a lot of people know. People brought babies to Jesus, hoping he might touch them. When the disciples saw it, they shooed them off. Jesus called them back. "Let these children alone. Don't get between them and me. These children are the kingdom's pride and joy. Mark this, unless you accept God's kingdom in the simplicity of a child, you will never get in." So first it was this story about this Pharisee that messed up. Who is it that messed up in this next little segment? The disciples. The disciples messed up. We all mess up. We all get our ego in front of ourselves or decide that this is what's good for this group of people. This is what's good for this other group of people. It's comparing. It's making a decision, and where Jesus is saying, just be who you are. God wants all of you. Just be who you are. So the comparisons told to those who thought highly of themselves and looked down on their others. Pharisees versus a tax collector. Well, the Pharisee is the person, the good Pharisee. I'm sure there were good Pharisees. Jesus was aware of it. Nicodemus was one of the good Pharisees that's listed. But Pharisees keep the law. They go by this objective standard. And this tax collector was a mess. He, for whatever reason of what he was doing, his job, he couldn't keep all the laws that were there. God have mercy on me, a sinner, is an awareness, a recognition of my flaws. It gives an opening for God to enter in, for change to occur. And heaven help our political system, because we don't allow anybody to make a mistake. As soon as somebody makes a mistake, they get pounced on. And so it creates an atmosphere where people running for office don't tell you the truth. Don't tell you what they think needs to be said, because you won't hear the whole story. You'll hear a speaking point and not all of it. It makes it for a very dangerous kind of a climate where we're afraid to speak the truth, because you might get it wrong. You might not understand it correctly.
And when something goes wrong, you pass a law.
You pass a law.
You prevent it.
Absolutely.
Whether or not it's enforced, whether or not it's practical,
Yeah.
you take that attitude toward the law.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly. And one person messes up something, so you create a law for it, and perhaps it could have been handled a little bit different way. So, but we all get to inherit that. Now consider the comparing mind, always needing to know who's best. Religious people, the morally good people, look at what's happening with Judge Moore. And what's happening with all of that. And there's a letter, for 50 some odd pastors who signed a thing that said, this is a morally good man, keep him, And then there's all these accusations, and so it's like, oh, well, there's so many accusations. We can't believe all the accusations. It begins, it desperately sets to muddy the water. And to say it's okay to muddy the water so that we don't have to make a decision. What ones need to have is a grounding, in all of us, a grounding in reality that I messed up. Not just in deed, but in my inclination. With all the ways I see things, I have, one song says, a bent to sinning. I have this bent to kind of keep making the same mistakes over and over again. But morality, in actuality, must be grounded in reality. Not the reality we have created, but the reality of what is, to allow each person to speak their sense of the reality and put it all together. It's a reality of its own making. So how do we see reality instead of our distorted view? Well, first of all, you have to acknowledge that you have a distorted view. That's kind of messed up. And that there's a possibility there might be a different way to look at it. Okay, that gives you an opening. And then you practice seeing your distorted view and seeing what it does to other people, seeing what it does to you, and then begin to relax it. The power that takes away its power from keeping me on that same path. So then you practice living life from a different angle, even if it feels uncomfortable for a while. Because if you're changing your habit, the habit feels good. That's why you've kept doing it. But you need to change the habit if you're going to change. When I went to when I lost my weight, one of the things the doctor said is if you continue to eat the way you ate before you got here, you'll be back here in very little time, you have to make some changes. And you have to be willing to make those changes. I like a change I thought for one would be giving money away to someone who didn't deserve it. We are in the season of Christmas and Thanksgiving. And are you going to give? Are you going to give to the food pantry? Are you going to adopt a child for Christmas? Buy Christmas gifts, for someone that's not in your family, who doesn't deserve it. That may be a little bit of hard for people. For once. It's entitlement, and it's, gosh, they worked hard to earn that money, and you're going to just throw it away? Yeah. So what?
Except there's a part of that where one would do that to give away because they think it's the right thing.
Because they think it's the right thing to do, absolutely. Because there is that other side of the one, and there will be ones who will do that exactly. In fact, if you don't give, then that would be the horrible thing, But it works from both ways. But it's because of the pull of having to do what's right.
One other thing on comparisons, I was thinking for one, sometimes, if somebody says generally a criticism of a group, and you haven't done any of it, you feel guilty.
Yes.
Even though you had nothing to do with it.
Yes, yes. And we hear on the news all the time groups getting accused of things, and then you say, well, I'm part of that group. I don't do that. So.
Oh, but I meant really.
Oh, you meant really.
I can remember teachers, getting after the classroom because some had done it.
But you hadn't.
Innocent, but I felt guilty. She made that comment.
Comment, okay.
It must be part of me.
Yeah, like a teacher.
Yeah.
Well, and when the authority says you're guilty, you must be guilty. Yeah, that's part of that too. Very good. For one, perfection, there is that standard. And you must reach it or die trying, But listen to this. Trying to please God is offensive. It is offensive to try to please God. Babies don't try to please their parents. We love them, we appreciate them, poop and all. It's that kind of offensiveness that our efforting is. It's not because it does not recognize the relationship that is there. It doesn't recognize the heart that is the basis of that relationship. Trying too hard is manipulative and it's unreal. It puts us into being not who we are, but trying to make ourselves into something that we think we ought to be. Okay? So the idea is to relax. So ones, like the rest of us, have to let go. And instead of declaring God is on our side, get out. God's not on anybody's side. God is God and allows you and invites you to come and be a part. So, and the only thing you have to do is stop trying, which is horrible for once. Stop trying.
I heard a beautiful phrase the other day, and God is as close as your breath.
Mm-hmm.
He is your breath, so
Yep.
it's not like it belongs to the good.
Yeah.
It's everybody's breath.
Yes. And every time you take a breath, you have the, you have the ability to recognize that God is that close. Yeah, very much so. I like that. So, obtaining God's grace is resting in love, not an efforting of will. I like what he said on page 34. What we accomplish is largely dependent on forces outside of us. In other words, it's not really all of our effort anyways. A lot of it's happenstance, the place we got born into the world, the disaster that came or didn't come upon us, you know, those kind of things. So the number one's danger is legalism and comparing. And the gift is grace. Close your eyes for just a moment and imagine a graceful dancer. Just watch in your mind. Might be a ballerina, might be doing a waltz, anything, but a dancer. And imagine the fluidity, the effortlessness, the playfulness. Imagine a graceful dancer, effortless, brought about by the years of discipline. Such a paradox that the discipline is still there. The discipline is still needed. But it's not this measuring standard kind of a discipline. Jesus says, don't suppose for a moment I have come to demolish the scriptures, either God's laws or the prophets. I'm not here to demolish, but to complete. I'm going to put it all together. Put it all together in a vast panorama. God's law is more real and lasting than the stars in the sky and the ground at your feet. Long after the stars burn out and earth wears out, God's law will be alive and working. Trivialize even the smallest item in God's law, and you will only have trivialized yourself. But take it seriously. Show the way for others, and you will find honor in the kingdom. Unless you do far better than the Pharisees in the matters of right living, you won't know the first thing about entering the kingdom. Again, we're going back to these sheep, to these children. This idea of simplicity, of simply accepting that you are loved. That's all it is. You are loved. So, if we go back to the lost sheep, ones have a hard time with it because forgiveness of sins is not a conditional forgiveness. Forgiveness is contrary to the law, and we don't often like it. It's a pardon. It happens when a wrongdoing has been committed. Okay? Take Sheriff Joe Arpaio. He was pardoned. Now, a lot of people are very, very unhappy about that. He was pardoned before he was sentenced. But he was pardoned after he was convicted. The conviction is there. That's why pardon is necessary. Because you did something wrong. Now, whether we won't get into all of his political stuff and all, but it makes for an interesting example. So forgiveness shows this distinction between the good and the bad. God loves all. For the Pharisees, this horribly goes against the grain. So anyone can get to God? So what good is all of this that I'm doing? So all my good effort, my striving, keeping the rules, is it worth it? Those are good questions to be able to ask, and certainly the one brings it up. If you're going to pardon everybody anyways, if we're all going to get to heaven, you know, regardless. Hear this one last parable. This is one of the doozies for. It's the story about the laborers in the vineyard. And not everybody knows this parable, okay? This sometimes surprises people that it's even in the Bible, okay? Especially if you're a capitalist, this is not a good parable. God's kingdom is like an estate manager who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. Now, pay attention that when a parable says at the very front, God's kingdom is like, this is the comparison that's being made. Okay, this is the main point. They agreed on a wage for $1 a day and went to work. Later, about 9 o'clock, the manager saw some other men hanging around the town square, unemployed. He told them to go to work in his vineyard and that he would pay them a fair wage. They went. He did the same at noon and again at 3 o'clock. At 5 o'clock, he went back and found still others standing around. He said, "Why are you standing around all this day doing nothing?" "Because no one hired us." Well, he told them, "So go work in my vineyard." When the day's work was over, and I imagine that's when the sun went down, whenever that was, the owner of the vineyard instructed his foreman, "Call the workers in and pay them their wages. Start with the last hired and go on to the first." Okay, so we're starting to the ones who were just got there, been there maybe an hour or so. Those hired at 5 o'clock came up and were each given $1. When those who were hired first saw that, they assumed they would get far more. But they got the same, each of them $1. Taking the $1, they groused angrily to the main manager. "These last workers put on only one easy hour, and you just made them equal to us, who slaved all day under a scorching sun." And he replied to the one speaking for the rest, "Friend, I haven't been unfair. We agreed on the wage of $1, didn't we? So take it and go. I decided to give the one who came last the same as you. Can't I do what I want to with my money? Are you going to get stingy because I'm generous?" Here it is again, the great reversal. Many of the first ending up last, and the last first. Oh my gosh.
You can't earn grace.
You can't earn grace. It's not a story about what we should pay people. It's a story about God saying, "My grace can't be earned. Ever. There's nothing you can do to earn it."
I was just reading, and I'm sorry I can't recall the quote, but meritoriousness, which is what the ones are seeking, is a form of hatred. And it makes me better than you. And it's a kind of a hatred.
Okay, let me repeat that. So ones are meritorious.
Meritoriousness is a form of hatred.
And it's a form of hatred
Yes.
because it makes me better than you.
And so I look down on you.
I look down on you. Yeah. And that's what the laborers who worked all day, hey, I did more. I worked hard. I should get a reward for what it is. Yeah. Yeah. Very, very true. The parable doesn't make sense in our monetary world. But the radical answer from the outlook of the kingdom of God is yes, your good effort is worthless. God loves me before the effort. God's love of reality as it is before the corrections. So relax. You're already accepted. You don't have to hide the heart. It's already there. good is constantly seeking good and seeking love. The lost sheep, that the parable that we did of finding the lost sheep, refutes making a division between saints and sinners. That one sheep belonged in the fold with all the others. So there's no outsiders versus insiders. There's no Jew versus Gentile. There's no men versus women. There's no sacred versus profane. What the law does is it shows us all these barriers that we create. Ones try too hard, and it turns the anger in on themselves and on other people. So Jesus would never meet the objective standards of the Pharisees. Whenever they asked a question that required that, he never would meet that objective standard. He always pointed to the reality below it. That little empty kernel that all the hedges were protecting. So what do ones need to let go of? Well, they need to let go of the job, of the responsibility that they've taken that they have no business taking. Just like all of us do. Is let go of that job and come at the world from a new perspective, from God's perspective that everyone is loved. Everyone is loved. And if ones can keep that in the background, that God truly does love these people that I cannot stand because they won't get it right. That's where we need to go.
Side that one would feel that everybody else is loved, but they're not.
I think sometimes, sometimes they do it just on themselves. They do a number. I think a certain subtype does more of a number on themselves. The rest of the world is more aware of the ones that do it on everybody else. You know, but
Pick yourself up with the law.
yeah. But the point is that ones just don't allow themselves to love. And so one of the things is for loves to imagine being held in God's arms. You know, just like a child would. Just be held in God's arms.
If you're judging everybody else, you're judging yourself too.
Yeah.
Because you can't just say,
Yeah. And the last thing I would say is ones need to give up the job of making themselves good enough for God and for taking God's place in the world. Yeah. I think, and that's the end. How did we do? Okay.
What subtype are you referring to?
To ones.
What subtype?
What subtype? Oh, you mean for the subtype? I think the subtype for self-pres would be the one that's so very hard on themselves. And then the other, social, and I'm not really sure. The one-on-one might, it might be the one-on-one. I didn't look that up before I came, so.
So, is this saying that, just looking at it from the perspective, I mean, I feel like in religion when I was a girl, maybe, my take when I was a girl, is you're always trying to work to do better.
Mm-hmm.
And so is this one saying that it's sort of written that way in the beginning, through the one's eyes, where you do have more of, if you do this, you're good, and if you don't do this,
Yeah,
you're bad.
it's.
So that through religion, sometimes people totally misunderstand
Oh,
what God's saying. I mean, that's the way I'm feeling. That's the way I felt when I was a girl. That's the way. And, you know, these stories that you're telling are certainly
well, and ones,
making
bless
judgments.
ones, bless their hearts, really fall into religion quite easily because they are so connected to a moral standard. And that's just right up religion's alley, you know. So that happens, and that's where you get the idea of hypocrites. You know, other people not liking religion because it's like they're all hypocrites. Well, no, they're not all hypocrites, they're all people. But some are a little more inclined to be hypocrites than others are, depending on their own bent in terms of how that is. You also have in religion a lot of people from the twos who we'll look at next time we meet after Thanksgiving, that twos are always doing good, and they're the do-gooders. Well, then they can get really angry when people don't do good the way they want it to be done. You know, so we can all do that, but certainly ones, a lot of ones get into religion or get caught up in it and don't like it because it seems to be all the bad stuff that they don't want to associate. And with you being a 7, you go to the 1, you know, as one of your arrows. So you certainly connect there, and that has a deeper impression. Yeah.
But it never felt right. Like it always felt wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, and good. That's a one's job, is to make you feel bad, so that you won't do that.
But as a 7, saying, "Oh, we got to find the good here."
Yeah, yeah. And so ones and seven have got to work this out. You know, in that arrow, because there's a portion of both of what they hold that's very real. That's a part of reality that you want to keep. But a portion of it is some that you want to throw away. Yeah. So, all right. Thank you all so very much.
Thank you.
And I hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving.
What are you doing for Thanksgiving?